One of the things I like about John Skinner is he comes up and he talks about the Psalms and how deep and meaningful they are to him. And I'll be honest with you, I really struggle with the Psalms. Okay, I struggle with poetry. It's not my gift. All right, we all have different gifts. What I can do though is I can see things in my head. I'm an engineer, right? I was an art major. I'm a visual kind of person. I am not a words person. So needless to say, I struggled in English class. Poetry's not my gig. So it probably is going to surprise you that the book of Job is actually one of my favorite books in the Bible. How can that be? Well, it's not because it's poetry and prose. It's not because of the courtroom-like drama. It's not for the description of the human condition, right? Death of a Salesman cured me of that one. But it's for the insight, okay? The book of Job is loaded with insight into the spiritual world in ways that have just blown my mind away. So with all that in mind, I struggling to understand Job, understand poetry in general, I've been trying to take a different approach. Rather than looking at its words, right? Poetry is pictures, right? They're trying to paint pictures. So I'm trying to look at poetry as if it were a painting. Or in this case, I'd like to present it as a stage production. Have any of you folks ever been to Sight and Sound? Ever heard of it? Anyone? It's a Christian theater in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They do these huge productions. They're really fabulous. We actually got a chance when we lived down there to see in the beginning. And the stage is almost surrounding you. It goes off to each of the flanks. And they have animals on stage. The productions are really good. One of the funny things about it in the beginning, Satan kind of looked like Barney. The snake, the serpent, Satan was purple. He kind of looked like Barney, and that's where I'm going to leave that one, okay? So anyway, with that, I would like to present to you Job as a 3-act drama. Act 1, Scene 1, Job 1 through 15. I'm sorry, 1 through 5. I'll try to picture this on a stage, right? People, things, it's a performance, okay? There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people in the past. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast ran their course, Job would send out and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their heart." Thus Job did continually. So imagine this, right? Animals everywhere, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 oxen, servants. The stage is just packed with critters and people. And there's a lot going on. And God presents to us Job. Act 1, Scene 2. Job 1, 6 through 12. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So the scene has shifted, right? We're no longer in an area with a bunch of farm animals and folks. We're in the throne room of God in heaven, and who shows up but the sons of God, who are angels, right? And Satan is amongst the angels. There's some insight for you, right? Where else do you get to see that in the Word of God? Then the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and all his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So God went out from the presence of the Lord. Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So again, we have some more insight, right? The sons of God, angels, Satan before the Lord, a day of reckoning. And the way this is described, it seems like somewhat of a common event, right? That this happens, I don't know, once a month, once a week, every few hours. Something to think about. So what is it that Job has? What is all that he has that God has released Satan to touch, to have a say in? I find this really interesting because Job is a man, right? And all that a man has is what's being described here. So what does he have? And there came a messenger to Job, and I'm jumping forward a little bit here. This is Act 1, Scene 3. The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So what did Job have? Oxen, donkeys, servants. Sheep, more servants, camels, servants, sons and daughters. All that a man has, sons and daughters, God put under his control. God expects Job to be responsible and care for his sons and daughters, yet God took them anyway. I see that as tremendous insight. As a man, I have that kind of responsibility, right? A lot of us here do, sons and daughters. Folks, we're responsible for them. God expects you to take care of them. So let's move along. Act 1, Scene 4. Job chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. Again, this seems to be a regular occurrence, right? I wonder if it's happening right now. Could it be? So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with, this is the point where Satan basically says, hey, look, yeah, you took his stuff from him, but if you really want to see what Job's made out of, afflict him. A man will do anything for his life, for his body. So God gives him permission, and Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself as he sat in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women who speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So, in the beginning of this scene, as Dave preached on previously, right, we're told that Job was an upright man, blameless. And he still holds on to his integrity, despite all the things that are going on. He doesn't know what's happening, right? He doesn't know Satan's up to all this. He's just feeling the pain and the misery and the difficulties of it. And yet he still manages to maintain his integrity until his 3 buddies show up, right? And we know that Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz, they show up. And in verse 13, they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Now, this is kind of all an introduction. This isn't the text that we're looking at, but the insight in there I think is amazing. The things that you see. And I know I've mentioned this in the past, but I think it's worth repeating. 7 days and 7 nights, okay? I do think these friends of Job were indeed friends, okay? They sat with him. I can't even imagine sitting with somebody for a couple hours without saying a word. And I'm an introvert, okay? I know my wife couldn't do it. So with that, I think we're done with Act 1 of Job. Again, if you'd still try to see this as a play, visualize it in your mind, I think it'll be helpful as we move along. So let's go to Act 2, Job 3 through 37, chapters 3 through 37. And Job's 3 friends come by, and this young street kid, and they open their mouth, and they start giving Job a hard time. All they can see is what's going on around them. They can see his difficulties, his suffering. And in their mind, suffering equals sin. They're sure that Job has done something wrong. They're positive that Job has brought this on himself in some way, no matter how strongly Job tries to tell them, no, this is not the case. In Act 2, Job 3 through 37, it's all that poetry stuff I'm not too fond of, so we're going to skip it. Kind of, anyway. We'll go back to it a little bit here and there. So let's get to Act 3, which is the main focus of today's message. Excuse me. So as I studied Job 38 through 41, I kind of put 42 in there, and that's not going to be today's message, but it is part of Act 3. And again, come on, it's a stage play, right? And the first verses out of this is when the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, which is a tornado, right? And said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man, then I will question you, and you make it known to me." So I asked myself, God says he's answering Job out of a whirlwind. Now I asked Derek to make me a whirlwind to make this kind of a little more interesting, but he wasn't able to do that. But, I've read through Job a lot of times, and I'm sure most of you folks have as well. And, you read it the first few times, and you kind of think, well, did God really answer Job? I didn't think so until I dug into it a little more deeply. So what is God answering? Well, let's go back and talk about, we are going to touch a little bit on Act 2 here, chapter 13, when Job starts to get himself in trouble, right? Up until now, Job has been blameless and upright. He hasn't made any mistakes. He hasn't said anything bad about God. He's held it together. But his 3 buddies have kind of pushed him over the edge, right? He's suffering. It's really bad. He's miserable. He's in survival mode. His friends are egging him on. And Job says in chapter 13:3, "But that I would speak to the Almighty and desire to argue my case with God." Verse 15, "Though he slay me, I will hope in him. Yet I will argue my ways to his face." 18 through 24, "Behold, I prepared my case. I know that I shall be right. Who is there who will contend with me?" This is Job. This isn't God. Okay? "For then I would be silent and die. Only grant me 2 things. Then I will not hide myself from your face. Withdraw your hand far from me, and let not dread of you terrify me. How many are my iniquities and my sins? Make known to me my transgressions. Why do you hide your face from me and count me as your enemy?" Whoa, Job. You had it so together. What happened? Right? Demanding from God, grant me 2 things. We ask God for a lot of things in our prayers, don't we? Let's hope we're not demanding them. Right? Withdraw your hand from me. Lord, stop the suffering. I know a lot of folks, the Skinners right now, Dan and his family have had some losses. I've had quite the string of losses myself not too long ago. And we pray for that, don't we? Lord, take this away. I've had enough. I don't want to deal with it. And the stupid things I've done and said in those times of suffering, just like Job. Right? Hey, Lord, make me know my transgressions. Hopefully you can kind of see yourself in some of this, right? If you were in Job's case. Let's move on. Again, in chapter 23 and 31, Job goes at it again. His buddies have just absolutely been all over him, and he's had it, and he goes into survival mode, and he just wants answers. 23, 3-7. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might even come to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know that he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, he would pay attention to me. There, an upright man could argue with him, and I would be acquitted forever by my judge. I would know that he would answer me. Did he? Or how about chapter 31, 35-37? Oh, that I had one to hear me. This is God talking to his friends on how he feels about how God's dealing with this. Here's my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. I'll sign the papers. I'll go to court with you. Right? Oh, that I had an indictment written by my adversary. God, what did I do? You need to tell me so I can argue my case. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it on me as a crown. Wear it proudly. I would give him an account of all my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. Job's getting a little prideful here, don't you think? So let's switch to, go back to the Lord's response to some of this. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, again, and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. It looks like God is kind of answering Job, isn't he? Job, you're darkening counsel with words without knowledge. You don't understand. You don't see it. You don't get it. And you're questioning me for it. Let's go. Dress for action. Put on your armor. Confront me. And we'll have this conversation. But the funny thing is here is you're going to find in a few minutes that God's actually kind of gentle and firm with Job at the same time. All right? He'll answer Job in ways that Job actually already understands and has said things about earlier. Okay? So God actually affirms and scolds Job simultaneously. And he uses the physical world, the descriptions of the physical world, things that Job understands and knows and sees every day, understands to the point that a human being can, obviously. And Job, earlier in the book, Job demonstrates that he does indeed understand these things. So how does God answer Job? He answers, this whole conversation is almost all rhetorical, right? Job's comments are rhetorical, mostly. God's are almost all rhetorical. So this is kind of almost, in our society, would be somewhat sarcastic conversation that's happening here. So let's look at some of Job's rhetorical questions back in chapter 9, 2 through 10. And this is Job answering one of his friends and talking about the character of God. So starting in verse 2, but how can a man be in the right before God? Well, what happened? He said this earlier, right? How can a man be right before God? Yet he's out there questioning God. If one wished to contend with him, one could not answer him once in 1,000 times. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who has hardened himself against him and can succeed? He who removes mountains, and they know it not, and then he overturns them in his anger, who shakes the earth out of its place and its pillars tremble, who commands the sun, and it does not rise, who seals up the stars, who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea, who made the Bear and the Orion and the Pleiades and the chambers of the south, who does great things beyond searching out, marvelous things beyond number. So what does God say to this? Well, in a sense, God's saying, hey, Job, you get this. Why are you being such a bonehead? Right? 38:4. God says to Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Who stretched out a line on it? On what were its bases sunk, or who laid the cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Job earlier just said in chapter 9, he attributes moving mountains and the creation of the earth, shakes the earth out of its place. God has the power. He knows that God did all this. But here's some more insight, right? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Who are the sons of God? We saw that a little bit earlier, didn't we? They're the angels. And notice Satan's not with them in this particular case. Some insight, right? Guess what, folks? The angels were around before the earth was created. And I kind of wonder if Satan was fallen or not at that point in time. 38:8. Who shut in the sea with doors when it bursts out from the womb? Again, this is God speaking. Thus far it shall come and no further, right? This is the shoreline. This is where the ocean goes. Isn't that what Job said earlier? Who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled on the waves of the sea? God, you control it. Verse 12, have you commanded the morning since your days began and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it? Again, right? Night and day, commands the sun. That's kind of weird, huh? The skirts of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it. I think what God's saying here is light exposes wickedness. And God's deciding who is exposed and who is not. Again, can you bind the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth Mazzaroth, which is just another word for the zodiac, in their season? Can you guide the Bear with its children? Again, another constellation, right? Job knows all this. So that's why I say I think God here is trying to affirm Job in some way, right? He's saying, look, Job, I understand you know some of this stuff. You know that I'm the creator. You know that I control it all. But what's with the attitude? Right? So the play goes on, and wouldn't it be cool if we could just like see all this stuff that's going on, right? God keeps going on with physics, right? And it's a lot of the same stuff. God's basically telling Job, I did this. I created it. I control it. It's my responsibility, not yours. Okay? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Obviously, God created it, not Job. Right? Who shut in the sea with its doors when it burst out of the womb? Again, we're talking about, it's almost all the same stuff. It's all parallel, right? Well, obviously God. He decides where the ocean is or where it is not. Okay? Have you commanded the morning since your days have begun, caused the dawn to know its place? Night and day. It's all the physical world, things that Job understands and sees every single day. Okay? And this is kind of God, like I said, laying a foundation of saying, God, saying to Job rather, I'm with you, okay? I'm with you. It's changed like clay under the seal, and its features stand out like a garment. God's basically saying, look, I did this. This is my signature, okay? You read it in the New Testament where it says that, you know, the whole world is his glory is seen every single day. There's no excuse. if you know, but it kind of moves on, and we keep talking about some of these physical properties in 16 through 38 here. Excuse me for one second. And what's going on here, I think, is God is going from the physical and obvious, and he's still using the physical world. I call it physics, right? Nature, but the physical aspect of nature, not the life aspect of nature, to start digging a little deeper. Start talking about getting Job to think more about moral issues and that type of thing, right? So verse 16, God says, have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the gates of darkness, deep darkness? Where is the way to the dwelling place of light? Have you entered in the storehouses of snow? Have you seen the storehouses of hail, which I have reserved for the time of battle? For the time of trouble or the day of battle and war. Right? So, I mean, you can see it, right? We're talking about the deep. We're talking about death. We're talking about light. God is light, right? And the stamp over this, right? God is absolutely declaring his sovereignty here. I've got this all stored up, and when history unfolds, I'm going to be there with nature and everything else, and I'm going to determine its outcome. He's storing up the hail and nature for the day of battle and war. God's sovereign. And with that, now God has actually switched gears again in 16 through 38, where and starts to kind of show that he's in control of things that Job's not even aware of, right? And I'm sure if Job thought about this, he'd have figured it out, but God's pointing it out to him, right? Who has cleft the channel for the torrents of rain and the way of the thunderbolt? Right? To bring rain on land where no man is. It's the old question, right? If a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, did it really fall? Well, yeah, obviously, but that's what God's pointing out here, right? All this stuff is going on that you're not aware of, and guess what? I'm taking care of it every single day. Just because man's not involved doesn't mean it's not happening, right? Bring rain on a land where no man is, on the desert in which there is no man to satisfy the waste and desolate land and to make the ground sprout with grass. Can you bind the Pleiades or loose back to the zodiac again, right? And who put wisdom in the inward parts and given understanding to the mind? Understanding to the mind. So you think Job really cares whether there's rain in a desert somewhere that he's not around and no man is around? Probably not, right? But God does. And God is who gave Job the ability to think, to conceive. Amazing. And again, we switch gears, right? God starts talking about animals. Okay, and this is something that, let's not forget Act 1, Scene 1. Thousands of sheep and donkeys and oxen and such. And Job cares for them, right? They're his livestock. He feeds them. His servants feed them. They clean the cages or pick up after them and take care of them, etc. But here's God saying, yeah, you can, Job, you can actually go out there and care for some animals. You can do all that, but what about the rest of it? Can you hunt prey for the lion? Do you know when the mountain goat gives birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Who's let the wild donkeys go free? Is the wild ox willing to serve you? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly. Did you give the horse its might? Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars? So God is showing Job that there's just so many things that are happening that he's designed that, Job, it's really, I don't want to say it's none of Job's business, but it's not of his concern. He's not thinking about it. And neither are we, right? I mean, this stuff happens all the time, but God's got it all under control. So, I'm missing a page here, hold on. God kind of stops in chapter 40 and gives Job a minute here and says, and the Lord says to Job, shall a fault finder contend with God? Let him answer it. All right, Job, you've heard what I've had to say. I've got this all under control, Mr. Fault Finder. What do you have to say for yourself? And Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but I will proceed no further. Okay. Then God answers Job again. And I think this is the linchpin of the book of Job. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, dress for action like a man. Again, the same words, right? Dress for action like a man. I don't think I ever want to hear that. At least not from God. I will question you and you make it known to me. It's almost the exact same words. Will you even put me to the wrong? Will you condemn me that you might be right? Have you an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? Can you, it doesn't say can, but it's implied, adorn yourself with majesty and dignity? Clothe yourself with glory and splendor? Pour out the overflowings of your anger and look on everyone who is proud and abase him. Then I will acknowledge to you that your own right hand can save you. So in the word, right, the right hand of God is often associated with salvation, right? And God is basically saying here that, you're coming to me and trying to save yourself by arguing a case. But the reality is, you don't have an arm like God. You can't save. Only I can save. And Job says, how can a man be right before God? This is way back in chapter 9. Job knew this. He knew this. How can a man be right before God? If one wished to contend with him, he could not answer him once in 1,000 times. We talked about that already. This is going back and forth, right? He knows he says and does something stupid. He knows he says and does something stupid. And then God starts talking about two amazing creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan, right? And I think this is where God's point really comes in. And I struggled with these passages, I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of different ways to look at them. I think there may be some parallels in looking at them in different ways. But I can tell you one thing I am convinced of, that Behemoth is a real animal. I don't think it's a hippopotamus, as a lot of commentaries talk about, for a lot of reasons. But let's read about Behemoth, right? Behemoth, behold Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Well, that's interesting. I made Behemoth as I made you. That's one of the things that makes me think Behemoth is real, because he's comparing a real man to Behemoth. Okay? Eats grass. It's not a carnivore. It's a, what's the other word? Thank you. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power in his muscles of his belly. And he makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is of the first works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword, for the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plant he lies in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. For his sake, for his shade, the lotus trees cover him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident though the Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can one take him by the eyes or pierce him with a snare? So God made him, right? He eats grass. His tail is stiff like a cedar. Cedar's a big tree, right? So he's got a big, strong tail. Limbs are like bars of iron. One of the first works of God. It takes an entire mountain to feed this beast. All right? He lives under the lotus plant. He spends a lot of time on the water. The lotus plant's like a marsh, a little lily pad kind of a thing, right? And he's so huge and so massive that he could probably stand in the Jordan River, open his mouth in the springtime when all the mountains are yielding snow melt into the thing and take it in, right? Talk about putting your mouth to a fire hose. This beast is enormous. I think it's a real creature. It's probably a dinosaur. But what's it represent here? It represents the strong and the proud. Okay? The behemoth, I think, represents the natural world. I think it's real. This is something that existed at one point, whether Job was there at the time or not. I don't think it really matters. Right? But the other point is that God created the behemoth. The behemoth is subject to God. The natural world, the proud, it's all subject to God. Man can't control this creature. Then you ought to be a little less proud than behemoth, right? Leviathan. So this one's a little pretty terrible here, right? I'm not so sure Leviathan is a real creature or not. I'm not saying he's not. I think it's a possibility that it could be, but I do think that this is more of a metaphor than a real creature. I'm kind of mixing this up a little bit, but there's a reason for it. All right, so here we go. Here's the description of Leviathan. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs or his mighty strength, big, strong, or his goodly frame. Who can strip off his outer garment? Who can come near with a bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth is terror. Okay, his back is made of rows of shields, shut up so closely as with a seal. One is so near to the other that no air can come between them. They are joined to one another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coal, and flame comes forth from his mouth. His neck abides strength, and terror dances before him. The folds of his flesh stick together. His neck abides strength. Oh, sorry about that. The folds of his flesh stick together, firmly cast on him and immovable. His heart is hard as stone, hard as a lower millstone. And when he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid at the crashing that they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it does not avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He counts iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Slinging stones are turned to rubble. Clubs are counted as stubble. He laughs at the rattle of javelins. His underparts, the first time I read that, I read it as underpants, are like sharp potsherds. Now, here's a thought, right? He spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him he leaves a shining wake. One would think the deep to be white-haired. So let's kind of go over this and talk about some of the words in yellow. Mighty strength, right? This is a big, strong animal or creature, Well, we probably shouldn't call him an animal yet. Big teeth, okay? Shields that are joined so tightly together you can't even get air behind them, right? This is like a dragon or something, right? And it breathes fire. His heart is hard as stone. I wonder if that's his physical heart or his emotional heart or his moral heart. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. This thing can stand up, whether on high legs or four legs, whatever, but when it stands up, no one's coming near. All right? Nothing touches him that's been made with man or by man. The sword, the spear, the dart, the javelin, iron, bronze, arrows, stones, clubs. Nothing touches this beast. (41, 33 through 34). On earth there is nothing like this creature without fear. He sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. I am convinced that the king of over all the sons of pride is Satan. And interestingly, interwoven within this discussion, there's some stuff that kind of hints at that as well. Verses 3 through 6. Will he make pleas to you? He being Leviathan, okay? Will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you to take him for your servant forever? Probably the other way around, right? Will you play with him as a bird? Will you put him on your leash for your girls? Will trade his bargain over him? Will he divide him up among the merchants? I guess you really probably shouldn't be playing with Satan, huh? Behold, the hope of man is false. He is laid low even at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to stir him up. Who then is he who can stand up to me? God's saying, look, yeah, he's Satan. I think he's Satan, but God actually created him. So if you can't stand up to Satan, how can you possibly even come close to standing up to God? So I ask again. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge, dressed for action like a man? I will question you, and you will make it known to me. Did God answer Job? He answered Job in a lot of ways. But I think the final answer that Job got was, and I'm not sure if Job even understood this or got it himself, God told Job who was behind all this. He told him that all this was going on because of Satan. That's it.